What's up, you guys? It's Matt. I'm wearing a hat today because I mean absolutely butchered my hair. Like, my clippers, they're homophobic and this is a hate crime, and I don't know what I'm gonna do. It's really, really bad. But today I wanted to talk to you guys about a book that I read recently, and I just kind of want to talk about it. I'm very confused and conflicted on my feelings, but I do want to do a video on it because I do feel like you guys should read it. Um, Especially because it's a lesser known book, and I'm sure it's kind of underrated. So I always like to get the word out about books that not many people are reading. So the book I'm talking about today is Netherlight by Sean Paul Stevens. So this is an epic fantasy series set in a world that has kind of like 1800s-ish level technology. Things are like lit by gas and whatnot. In the very, very beginning of the book, in the prologue, we get a scene where two parents are trying to protect their twin kids from being bound. Binding is a thing that has to happen to everyone in this world in order for them to be allowed to live and be accepted into society. But these two parents are adamant that they don't want to bind their children. Flash forward 17-ish years, and we are following the main character, Guyan. So Guyan and his family flee from their country to a place called Seldari, I think, something like that. And over there, he and his family are definitely discriminated against. There's definitely some racism at play that he has to deal with throughout the book. There's a lot of prejudice. Guards, like city guards, are always kind of eyeing him suspiciously and whatnot. But in the story, we follow Guyan as, in the beginning of the book, something bad essentially happens to his brother, and for the rest of the book, we spend that time trying to save him. It is a book that is just very, very confusing to me. Don't take this the wrong way, but it reminds me of Name of the Wind in some way. I can't quite put my finger on it, but there's something about the narrative, although it doesn't use like the narrative device of storytelling, but there's something about how the narrative is constructed that reminds me of Patrick Rothfuss. I guess maybe it's kind of how the story is kind of meandering and like slice of lifey, but at the same time it's also always interesting and engaging. This is a book that was kind of slower paced. There wasn't like breakneck action all throughout the story. And I was always interested and invested enough to continue reading, but I wasn't loving the book until close to the very end, at which point I got more on board with it, but even then I still didn't love it. I'm going to explain a little bit about the world building. In this world, everyone has to be bound. I guess they're being bound from magic, essentially. It's to protect them from magic, I suppose. It's not quite explained properly. But basically infants are always given this poison, essentially, that basically makes them immune from magic. However, it is dangerous and it does kill some of them. And depending on your genetics, you might die. It kills entire families. So that's the reason that the parents didn't want to vaccinate Guyan and his twin brother Melian. But in this world, there's a type of magic called phase. This is one of the problems I have with the story, is phase is never quite explained. On one hand, I get that because it's said in the book that phase isn't really understood by anybody. But then on the other hand, there are phase devices. Sure, these devices are rare-ish, kind of rare, I guess. There are these devices made using phase. And so obviously some people can understand and use it. So that was kind of one of the problems I have with the book. But throughout the book, we learn that Guyan is different. He has these kind of weird coincidences more and more throughout the book until he starts to realize that there's something different and weird about him, and that maybe he was never bound. The way that I understood the magic to work is essentially phase allows you to manipulate probabilities of things happening. The way that I would kind of describe it is, you know how there's kind of like the like multiverse theory that every choice essentially that happens splits off into a different reality. So everything that can happen will and has happened. So I feel like that's a little bit the premise of how phase works. So Gaian is able to tap into phase, and then if he wants something to happen, he can use phase to basically drag drag the kind of result of the magic from that other kind of probability, from that other world, into his own. And so he's able to manipulate probabilities in very interesting ways. And so that was actually conceptually a very, very interesting magic system that I definitely do want to know more about, but we don't get a whole bunch of explanations throughout the book. Also, something else that is never, ever, ever explained or addressed is Gaian and his twin have something called a simulacrum. A simulacrum is kind of this ghostly little apparition, humanoid apparition, that Gaian sees following him around. Apparently, everyone, or most people, seem to have them as children, but then they lose them at some point. So that's kind of reminding me a little bit of demons in his Dark Materials. You know, the demons, they can switch forms to whatever animal, but then when the person kind of goes through puberty and becomes an adult and figures out who they are, the animal is basically bound into one single form that represents the person. I feel like in this world, the simulacrum are kind of like that, except only the person who has it can see their own, for the most part, and they apparently go away in childhood. But for Gaian and his brother Timoleon, they haven't. And so, again, there's just kind of this ghostly little figure following Gaian around all the time, and he is kind of funny, I'll admit that, but that's also never explained, which is kind of frustrating. Anyway, now I'm going to get into the plot a little bit more. I don't quite know how to talk about this book without it kind of being a little bit spoilery, because plot-wise, it's, like I said, plot-wise, it's just kind of very meandering, and it's kind of slice of life-ish. So basically, Gaian and his family arrive onto this continent, and they go and stay with some friends. They're very, very poor, but they are trying to find jobs to get on their feet, and so they go and sign up. And in this world, you are given a job. You're told what job you have to do. It's assigned to you, and that's what you're stuck with. And so his family, they all try and get jobs, and they're trying to bring in money so that they can get their own place. Gaian makes an enemy. He kind of reminds me of Kvothe's enemy at school, whose name I can't remember. Starts with a J. I want to call him Jackass, but that's not right. This guy, Rossi, and Gaian kind of keep getting into it throughout the beginning of the book, and eventually Gaian and his brother and Rossi have a little fight. Something very, very large and kind of explosive happens, and that brings attention to Gaian. And so basically Gaian is arrested. He is given a kind of serum that lets these people identify that he is able to kind of perform magic. And so because of that, he's brought to this order called the Devotions. The Devotions work kind of with magic. They have to kind of deal with and protect the binding that the civilization is kind of built on, and that's keeping everyone safe. But there's this thing called the Maddening going around, in which people are kind of going crazy and losing their minds, and so there's a whole thing with that. And so for a lot of the story, we're just kind of following Gaian around as he's working for the Devotions. It's not quite a school setting, but it does feel like a school setting to me. But while he's there, he makes some friends, some people he works with and admires. He has a girl he's interested in. He has a girl who he's kind of best friends with. Her name is Mist. She's the best character in the book. That is a fact. Um, and then he also makes some enemies where he is. And essentially, we're just kind of following him around for the rest of the book. Gaian's brother Temelian, after that explosive event with the bully Rossi, Temelian, he is kind of knocked unconscious and he's in a coma. And he is deteriorating and getting worse and worse and worse. So Gaian, while he's working for the devotions, is trying to find a way to cure and save his brother. Essentially is the plot of this book. But it's all very meandering and confusing. So my feelings on this book are very, very conflicted. The plot is quite slow for, I would say, at least the first half of the book, but I always was interested and engaged. I was mostly just very, very, very confused because the magic isn't really explained, and so I wanted to keep reading in order to find out how this magic works. And eventually we do get some answers, but we don't get all of the answers. So I'm actually totally invested enough that I am going to read book 2 whenever that comes out. But this is just a very odd book. I don't quite know who I would recommend this to. I guess I would recommend this to someone who likes a slower paced story, who doesn't mind something that's a little meandering. I, as you guys know, absolutely hate and despise Robin Hobb. But I feel like this book would go over pretty well with Robin Hobb fans. It does kind of remind me a little bit of Farseer in that we're mostly following Gaian's kind of just day-to-day life as he deals with being in this new setting and trying to help someone he loves. So I think if you're someone who doesn't need breakneck action throughout the entire story, the characters are really what the story is about. So if you are a character-driven reader, I think that you would like this. Gaian, throughout the book, actually does get some very nice character growth. At the beginning of the story, he's kind of a little bit petulant and, like, insolent, and it's just like, dude, come on, like, be better. He can kind of, like, snap at people and be sarcastic in a hurtful way for essentially, like, no real reason. And I was kind of frustrated with him in the beginning because of just the way that he was thinking and just kind of being selfish in some ways. But on the other hand, he loves his family so much that he'd do anything for them. And so throughout the story, he actually does grow and change. He realizes that he can and wants to protect everybody around him, not just his family. And he has a more solidified sense of right and wrong as the story goes on. And so, yeah, this is just a weird book. I just wanted to talk to you guys about it. I do think that you should definitely try it and pick it up and see how it goes. I think you just need to know what to expect going into it, and hopefully this video has helped you kind of learn what to expect. I do think this is a book that a lot of people actually will like. I think that the series is going to get better and better as it goes on. I believe that this book is a debut, and while I didn't pick up on that as I was reading the book, learning that afterwards, I can now kind of see how that affected the writing of the story. Because the first 20% is slow, could have been cut, and then the next 40% is also not as tight as it could be. But I really didn't mind it. I gave this book 3.75 stars. It's not a 3-star book. It's definitely better than that, but I wouldn't say it's good enough to be 4 stars. So 3.75 is kind of what I landed on. I believe that this book was part of Mark Lawrence's SPFBO for self-published books. It's kind of just a competition, and so if you guys are familiar with that at all, I think that that could definitely draw you to this book. It was deemed good enough to enter the competition, so it is definitely a decent book. But yeah, those are just my thoughts. I just wanted to share them with you guys, and I want to see if any of you guys have read this. and if any of you guys will pick it up. I really, really want to talk to somebody else about this book, but I don't know anyone who's read it. So hopefully you guys do. Anyway, that's all I have for you guys today. Wish me luck with my hair, and have a good one. Bye.